In a war which was basically a war between the haves and the have-nots, Jack Roberts of Abertridw, Jack Russia as he used to be known, never had much choice as to which side he'd be on. He was a deeply committed communist, and with 120 other Welshmen, most of them unemployed miners like himself, he fought in the Spanish Civil War, memories of which are fast fading now. These men believed that something very special had happened in Spain. In 1931, with great rejoicing, a new republic had been proclaimed. When, 5 years later, a Popular Front government got elected, millions felt that it was possible that in due time there could be an end to poverty, injustice and oppression. Not the least cause for happiness back in 1931 was the fact that the Spanish king, Alfonso XIII, had stepped down from his throne and taken himself off into exile. Hoping to hang on to power, he'd ordered municipal elections throughout the country, only to find a massive anti-monarchy vote against him. It was time for a clean sweep. The new government of 1931 wanted to drag a backward Spain into the 20th century, but its supporters came from such a clamour of different parties that when the cheering and the waving were over and the speeches that promised so much came to be analysed, there was still going to be left the ancient Spanish quarrels. First about the land, and 70% of all Spaniards lived, that is to say subsisted, off the land, while 4% of the population owned the greater part of it. Then, as now, there was the problem of regional self-rule, and last, there was the business of the church and its power. What kind of sin is committed? A question in the Church Catechism asked in 1927, just 4 years before the Republic was set up. What kind of sin is committed by one who votes for a liberal candidate? Generally, the answer ran, generally a mortal sin. Question: is it a sin for a Catholic to read a liberal newspaper? Answer: he may read the Stock Exchange News. The life of agricultural labourers was worse than feudal. They'd assemble in the village squares at dawn to await the arrival of the agents from the owners' estates. If they were lucky, and many weren't, they'd get off at a day's work, and the wage would be 3 pesetas, at today's value, perhaps 8p. That was the Spain that Welsh miners, who knew plenty about poverty, were going to go off to, and to go out of strong political belief. One of the old school, Jack Roberts, has alas died since this film was made. His communism derived from Marx and the chapel.
The Sermon on the Mount told us that we all should get a fair share. Well, then the best way of getting a fair share, as far as I was concerned, was the communist way of taking over everything. And having regarded the fact that the owners had had everything for so long, enjoyed so many privileges on this scale, that the workers, whether here or in Russia or anywhere else, doesn't matter, they had nothing. So it was just about time that they had a share. And to me, then Christianity and communism, they linked that together. I didn't see any difference at all in it. No contradiction as far as I was concerned.
Another who fought in Spain, indeed who was under sentence of death there, Tom Jones, Shotton.
In those days, the adults in particular looked upon trade unionism, politics and religion as being synonymous. And then you had the hymn singing. We used to sing these hymns at political and even trade union meetings. So that our hymns in Welsh were, had a political significance. They expressed our feelings against the system under which we lived. It was the only, we didn't have any revolutionary political songs, so we sang hymns. For example, Rwy'n gweld o bell y dydd yn dod. Well, I see from afar the day's dawning. And what we meant by the day dawning was not only the spiritual, but the political and economic freedoms that we aspired to achieve.
One who was going to bring back bloody memories of war in Spain was Will Lloyd of Aberdare. As a pip boy, he was near death early on.
I worked with a young boy who about 23, and I was working there about 3 months when you both under the same stone. Unfortunately, his skull was crushed. I was trapped under the same stone. I shouted for help, and eventually the help came, and the overman just felt the back of his head, and he said, well, he's had it. And he was taken to hospital. He died the same night. There was arguments amongst our own, my uncles and so forth, whether I should go to work the next day, and somebody said, if you don't go to next day, you'll never go. So you must go. I returned to work the next day, and I was put back in exactly the same place, cleaning up the mess.
Whatever solace or prospect of salvation religion had presented to an earlier generation of colliers, there was going to come a time in the 1920s and 30s when many would view with distrust and even disdain the old sources of succour. If there was ever to be a sense of common decency and justice, let alone heaven on earth, heaven was the last direction in which they would look for it, as the 12th child of a miner remembers, Gwyn Thomas.
Let's think for a couple of seconds about the South Wales of that period. It had for a couple of generations been lit up by this great evangelical belief that things, by the exchange of a few sermons and hymns, was going to be transformed, changed in shape and flavour. And that had happened all of a sudden, and it changed all of a sudden. The First World War saw the end of the great preachers. Nobody would ever listen to them again with a grain of belief.
Will Painter, who was to go to Spain as a political commissar, his communism left no room for religion.
I took a stand. I left the chapel, and this, of course, caused a great deal of anguish as far as my mother was concerned, to the extent that one afternoon when I returned home from work in the Colliery, the local preacher was present, a man with the name of the Reverend W.J. Bryan, and he was there to talk to me. And I was very tired. We had no pitted baths in. I was in my working clothes. I had a meal, and I was getting ready to bath when he came, and he pulled my mother down and myself, and he was in the middle onto the rag mat in front of the back kitchen fire. And he started to pray for my soul and wanting a change of heart on my part and calling upon the Almighty to produce that change of heart. My mother started crying, and that had an effect on me, with the result that I yanked him to his feet. Although I wasn't very articulate in those days, I had to tell him that if he couldn't convince me on the basis of logical argument, he wasn't going to do it by emotional pressures of that kind, and he had to leave the house. I wasn't prepared to tolerate that kind of attempted conversion.
Of course, the press, certainly the Cardiff Western Mail of the period, was very much on the side of the owners and of the police, unfeeling law and order. When militant miners were sent to jail, the Mail gloated as though they were footpads about to serve time. Goodbye for 3 years, it jeered. In a matter of a few more years, some from the valleys, these troublemakers, these enemies of society, would have a new pride, that they were in a crusade against fascism in Spain. All they wanted to do was to change the world a bit, but for a man like Jack Russia, what he did in Spain was no more a point of pride than what he did in the Depression.
I suppose that you could say that I'd be rather innocent or naive at that particular time, but I felt that any little trouble that you could cause the authorities in any direction would help to bring about the revolution.